Overall, John, who are your most drafted quarterbacks of this offseason?
So the meta for 2024 fantasy football, long story short, is that elite quarterback, the guys we took in the second and third round last year, failed. The entire top tier players came back in points per game. And that's why those elite players at quarterback are now available at the end of the third round, the fourth and fifth round as well. And so to me, I want to have elite quarterback in every draft. And that begins with Jalen Hurts. Let's remove Brian Johnson's offense last year and now go to a Kellen Moore offense that not only led the league last year in combined play volume with their opponents at the Chargers, but also remember, the Cowboys with Dak Prescott at full health never finished outside the top 6 in plays per game under Moore. Not only that, but we can throw Jalen Hurts' second half of the year out the window. He was literally dealing with 3 different injuries, and that's why he averaged, 7.5 weekly carries when his career average is over 12, and 6.5 yards per attempt, which is like bottom feeding compared to his usual production output. And now he's being drafted in that third, fourth round turn around T. Higgins, George Pickens, Terry McLaurin, Travis Etienne. I would argue 10 out of 10 times I'm betting on Jalen Hurts over that group of wide receiver 3s, running back 2s arguably. And so I like to begin my draft. I like to have a lot of Jalen Hurts this year.
And I think point where he was playing banged up throughout the second half of last year, that could almost single-handedly mitigate any potential loss in rushing touchdowns from Saquon Barkley. I don't even think that's going to happen necessarily, but you look at it in 2021, 52 rushing yards per game, 2022, 50. Last year, dropped down to 35.6. So again, anyone that was out there watching it, really, it was around week 7, week 8. Even if he wasn't actively on the injury report every week, you really did see a shell of himself in terms of that open field dynamic running ability. Because, let's not forget, this is sub 4.6 quarterback out there with some legit speed to make big things happen. And last year, he was almost just turning into this short yardage, master. So that's not going anywhere. But again, should be expecting quite a bit more out of him, hopefully just in terms of getting that rushing yards per game up. And John, I was starting my wide receiver tiers actually yesterday, and I had this almost epiphany where it's like, we all talk about the big 5, CD, Tyreek, Chase, Sun God, and Justin Jefferson. And just hit me. I was like, why is A.J. Brown not in this group? And it was almost like 2 years ago where I should have had Stephon Diggs up in the group as well, and I didn't. And he ended up having, a really freaking good year. So, I've really tried to go out of my way more to draft A.J. Brown early, in these tiebreaker situations against the running backs and against, the Garrett Wilsons and the Puka Nakuas of the world. And when you do that, man, few things feel better in this world when you can get your guy AJB. And then in round 4, get Jalen Hurts in a lot of formats.
I don't bat an eye whenever A.J. Brown is drafted over Puka Nacua. That's how it should be. Just teeter between those two exposures. Whichever one you prefer, that's totally fine. To me, the big winner is Devonta Smith because A.J. Brown had a career high in targets and catches last year. I don't know how much more we can expand that target tree for him. Whereas Devonta Smith, maybe he's the guy now, since his slot rate has increased in every season in the league, maybe he's the one to fall into that Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb role that has flourished under Kellen Moore. And for his career, not used in the slot heavily, but Devonta Smith is actually 4th in the league in yards per out run from the slot. So if we're going to get that role for him, I think he's the one whose target tree expands. And that's why I've been taking him, I know it sounds crazy, but over Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle. I want to be higher on Devonta Smith in that tier of players.
Bold call, Mr. Daigle. I'm certainly not out on Devonta. Over Waddle and those guys, maybe a little rich for me, but investing in this Eagles offense as a whole, I think, is the moral of the story. Dallas Goedert, certainly, I think, one of the most mispriced tight ends out there. And hey, mentioned it on the news yesterday. Paris Campbell, wide receiver 3, maybe just
Paris
maybe.
Campbell.
So who knows, man. Daigle, you have 2 more favorite QBs. Who we got?
Again, sticking with elite, but it's a little different because Patrick Mahomes, usually everyone wants to bet on CJ Stroud's second year, and he'll go over Mahomes. Whereas I have Mahomes ranked as my QB3 over Lamar Jackson. I have compared it all offseason to buying Apple stock low because what happened last year, I would imagine doesn't happen again. Mahomes is coming off career lows in touchdown rate and fantasy points per game, 17.5 points per game. It was his first time to average less than 20. Not only that, but Andy Reid's offense, it was also their first time to throw for 30 passing touchdowns since Alex Smith was under center, and L'Jarius Sneed clearly no longer on the team. Whenever Sneed was on the field, this was literally a top 3 defense in EPA per play. They were arguably the best defense in the league, which is why I kept on betting them through the playoffs, because I think that's the one caveat that everyone missed is how good they were. So they don't have to be that identity that they were last year with Mahomes' worst receiving corps his entire career, because now you've added Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy. It's going to be an explosive passing offense since those numbers typically regress for quarterbacks. So I am buying all in on Mahomes and the Chiefs passing offense. And because of that, I get less Isaiah Pacheco this year. And again, it's not because he's a bad player. I think he's a bad pick at his ADP. I think it's totally fine. I just want to leverage all of it and attack Patrick Mahomes in the passing game as much as I can.
Chiefs defense, the only team slash defense to not give up at least 30 points in a game last season. So you are spot on right there. And yeah, man, when you're able to get, again, Travis Kelce in round 3 and 4, a lot of these drafts now, then Mahomes, and then maybe just a Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice. It's wild. It's almost like because of these last 2 years where, again, we haven't seen the Tyreek Hill level fireworks out of any single wide receiver. But hell, in 2022, man, Juju Smith-Schuster and Mecole Hardman still put up top 36 numbers in PPR points per game. And we don't have a single Chiefs wide receiver going in the top 30 right now. I mean, it is wild. We're like, Mahomes' price really isn't changing. So I think everyone agrees that, okay, we're looking at top 5 numbers here. Kelce's price is dropping. Yeah, we can still get the wide receivers cheap, man. Like, I get the Rashee Rice situation in terms of him, obviously, likely facing a suspension, although that's not a guarantee, but really does seem like a rare situation where we can heavily get behind, maybe the best freaking quarterback ever. And for that reason, he is my 3rd most drafted quarterback of the offseason. So I'm right there with you, Johnny. 3rd favorite quarterback for you.
And my most drafted quarterback of the offseason is none other than Jayden Daniels. I think what's happening, especially in home leagues, because Daniels is being drafted to the QB 14, step back and realize that rushing points, that's why we talk about Anthony Richardson, are the skeleton key of the position. Reach Rebar coined it as the Konami code. He does this much better than me when talking about rushing quarterbacks. But the QB 12 through 24 this year, QB 2s and ADP, Deshaun Watson and Jayden Daniels are the only players in that range who have averaged over 3 rushing points per game for their career. So there's always those 2 players who can break into the top 12 based on their legs alone. But I think what's happening is that Daniels is being compared to Anthony Richardson when, for all the reasons we discussed earlier, Richardson is still a developing player growing into the passing game. We're drafting him for the floor and hoping to get the ceiling. Jayden Daniels is a significantly cleaner passer from day one. Literally led the nation in yards per attempt from a clean pocket last year. The only quarterback to average over 11 yards per attempt when he wasn't under pressure. Not only that, but remember, Kyler Murray finishes the QB 12 in points per game under Cliff Kingsbury. And since Jayden Daniels averaged 9.7 rushing points per game for his career at LSU, it's important to know that Cliff Kingsbury's offenses in Arizona for those 4 seasons, since he does run that spread scheme, they literally faced the league's lowest rate of 8-man boxes. They were playing light boxes with fewer defenders stacked in the middle, which is great for a mobile quarterback to get up and get some yards there in the shallow part of the field. So I'm betting on Jayden Daniels as a QB2 who I really think can finish in the top 8 as his position this year.
I'm not saying we're going to see Lamar Jackson level heights here. I mean, 2 freaking MVPs. Okay, we're not going to see too many guys go ahead and get there. But I do wonder with Daniels if it could be as simple as we get to literally week 1 or week 2. And it's like, oh yeah, the freaking Heisman winner who threw 40 touchdowns and ran for 1,100 yards in the SEC happens to, be someone that's going to break fantasy football to an extent. I mean, just again, looking at his last 4 games rushing with sacks counting against his rushing yardage in college, Alabama, 163 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Florida, 234 and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, Georgia State. I'm so tired of SEC teams always scheduling that freaking cupcake opponent in mid-November. But A&M at the end of the year, 120 rushing yards and 2, 3, 6, and 4 passing touchdowns in those games as well. So certainly not anywhere near as developmental as Anthony Richardson. That's a great call out. Daigle. Jesus, you guys both have D's in your name. Apologies. But and then you also actually mentioned my most drafted quarterback of the offseason. Not a very, crowd favorite. I get it. But Deshaun Watson, again, if you have to go through the quarterbacks and just say which of these guys do have the dual threat Konami code, shout out Lord Reeves upside, it would make sense that it is those 2. So good stuff, guys. Again, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Jayden Daniels. great day to be great.